Evening, guys. Welcome to Mastermind Content. I'm Richard O'Dale, and I will be your guide for the evening. Today, we're continuing our talk about the divine child, but in this session, we'll be focusing more on this divine child's superpower, which is belief. So, we'll be talking about self-belief and how we develop self-belief, but also how beliefs programmed within the memory impact our decision making in terms of how the choices we make and the behaviors that come from those decisions, which obviously then goes into limiting beliefs and false beliefs. And these are the wounds that we need to address and heal. Now, before I get into that, I'm just want to have a quick recap over some of the pointers that we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, just so that you're up to date again, that you understand that you're back on track. So, first of all, you may remember that we've spoken about how you can identify emotional wounds through archetypes that are undeveloped. And last week we spoke about when you feel resistance or anxiety or procrastination whenever you're facing something new, a new challenge. So this indicates there's an emotional wound present, which is another way of saying part of the personality has been repressed and has not had the opportunity to develop. So, in other words, that emotional wound that was caused in childhood remains in a childhood state because it's never been developed from that childhood state because it was repressed. Now, the other way to identify emotional wounds is what Carl Jung called a complex. And if you remember last week, I explained that a complex is a split off part of the archetype and it surfaces as childlike behaviors or irrational behaviors, set patterns of behaviors, attitudes, and motivations that are maladapted to the situation. But often, because it's in the unconscious, we're not aware that it's maladaptive. So, for example, people pleasers. Many people can go through their entire life not recognizing they've been a people pleaser because they just think they're being kind and generous. We hear a lot about imposter syndrome these days. This again is a pattern that you find in complexes. You've probably heard a lot of these complexes banded about. Mother complex and father complex, two of the obvious ones, they're the most spoken about. And um, they're all indications that there's some healing needs to be done. Another way of identifying this are things like addictions, especially habitual behaviors that you've done for years, which are damaging to your health or your relationships, like substance abuse, alcoholism, gambling, maybe spending too much when you go out shopping. And these days we get addiction to social media, people mindlessly scrolling for hours and going down a rabbit hole. So these are some of the ways that we can identify when there's an archetype that is undeveloped because there's an emotional wound there. And again, if you remember last week, we spoke about what becomes dismembered must be remembered. So when we have an experience in life, it's stored as a memory. And these memories are retrieved by the central nervous system and communicated to parts of the brain through these neural networks. And it's the brain that then decides, it makes the decision on how we respond. Ideally, you want your neocortex to be making the decisions because this is your logical part of the brain where you can plan, you can make strategies, and you can reason and discriminate and probably make a better choice. But when there's an emotional wounds, it's the limbic system that can often hijack the decision making faculty of the neocortex and cause you to behave in an irrational or childlike behavior. So the decisions we make are really based on the information stored as memory in the central nervous system. So let's look at this word information. In formation. We are in a state of becoming. We are being formed. So our personality is formed by being informed from the experiences that we have in the environment. Thoughts, actions, and emotions are all information. Thoughts, actions, and emotions are how we experience reality. So that's really important to remember. Now, you'll also remember that I mentioned that information is equivalent to all the qualities that are listed within these archetypes tool, both in the developed and the undeveloped columns. So if memories prompt our behaviors, then memories are also beliefs. What we believe can have a significant influence on the course of action that we take. And once we believe something, it can be very hard to change that belief system if it's completely ingrained within the memory. And that becomes a problem when our beliefs are limiting beliefs and false beliefs. Because often the limiting beliefs and false beliefs are unconscious, which means they're not available to the conscious mind. So they may prompt certain behaviors, and we may be aware of what we're doing, but we're not always aware of why we're doing it. So, for example, people pleasers is probably the best example. People pleasers put themselves out to do things for other people because they want to appear kind and generous and charming. But what they really want is to feel liked or needed. And that's because the limiting belief that nobody likes them or needs them is a memory for them that they developed probably in childhood and throughout the rest of their life. So, another example, you may be prone to self-sabotage because you have a subconscious belief that you are not good enough or that you don't feel worthy. You're not worthy of success. So then when you get too close to success, you subconsciously derail your progress because you have this belief that you are not good enough, and consciousness wants to confirm what you believe because what we believe becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So here's a quote from psychologist Dr. Joseph Murphy in his book, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind. And Dr. Murphy writes, everything that has happened to you happened because of your thoughts impressed on your subconscious mind through belief. If you have communicated wrong or distorted concepts of your subconscious mind, it is of the most urgent importance to correct them. And that's really what we're looking at doing through the archetypes, identifying where your beliefs are influencing your life in maladaptive ways. And even though Dr. Murphy wrote this in 1963, but modern science, the frontier science of today, like neuroscience, epigenetics, psychobiology, they are showing that the beliefs stored in the central nervous system is essentially the subconscious mind, which is the term used in psychology, and are responsible for much of our decision making. So you probably recognize these ideas from personal experience, and you'll certainly know these if you've been engaged in any self-development work. So I know you have, Michelle. I know that you're very well aware of your limiting beliefs and your false beliefs, and you've done a lot of work to overcome them. So
Yeah,
kudos to you.
thank you.
You're probably also aware that the, the decisions that we make influence how we experience reality. So if you're not having a good time, if you're not enjoying life, then we're probably making poor life choices, especially when we're addicted to things. So I used to be addicted to cannabis, and that's because I had limiting beliefs that I wasn't good enough, or I felt as though I needed a joint to give me the inspiration to think of something to write. So my limiting belief was I couldn't function, I couldn't write fiction unless I'd had a joint first. But that turned out to be a false belief. Now that was my undeveloped divine child looking for comfort in the the weed because it actually just helped me to escape the mundane world, and that was really the illusion that I was blinded by, and it wasn't my personal belief that I needed this to be able to spark my imagination. So basically, whatever addiction you have, it's probably motivated by a need to feel safe because you've developed a belief that whatever you're addicted to provides you with some form of emotional comfort and security. So this is really how beliefs have a massive impact on how we make decisions and how we choose to live. So we're going to have a look in this session of ways to overcome limiting beliefs first. So this is a strategy that you can follow yourselves, especially if you've got an addiction, but it can be used for specific personality traits that you're aware of. So people pleaser, like I said, is a common one. Imposter syndrome is possibly another common condition that or belief that people have. So the first strategy is to identify the belief. You have to be aware of the limiting belief in the first place before you can do anything about it. So observing where you have an emotional wound, as we've discussed, especially if there's a childish or irrational behavior there, and or you feel resistance to doing anything. So limiting beliefs typically surface as negative thoughts about yourself or your capacity to perform something. So I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I can't do this. These are all these limiting beliefs that are stored as memory in the central nervous system, which you are not aware of. Not only that, but if you have an overinflated ego, which means you focus too much on getting comfort from external things rather than connecting to yourself and asking how you really feel and what you really need, your overinflated ego will then draw you towards whatever you think or whatever you believe offers you comfort in any given moment. Now, there's nothing wrong with having lofty goals, but we have to take baby steps to develop the qualities we need to achieve those goals. So, recognizing limiting beliefs that tell you that I can't do this needs to be challenged, which is strategy two. So, step two is to challenge the belief. And this should be easy for some people if you've got limiting beliefs, because most people should recognize that they are worthy or of being loved or they are good enough. They've, you've got a history of success, you've got a history of doing things for people where you have offered value. Even something as simple as you work in a post office. You may not think that your job is exciting or that you're offering value to people, but when you think about it on a grander scale, you're helping one person send information to somebody else. So there's two people that you're providing value to there in the first place. But then you've also got your employers. Hey Tim, I can't see you, but oh, did he? I, I, I don't know if whether he's joined or not. I admitted him, but I can't see him. Tim, if you're there, can you just let me know? Ah, there you are. Hey Tim, can you hear
Uh,
me? Okay.
yeah, just
Okay,
have a
good.
few technical issues there, but managed to swear at it hard enough to make it work.
That always works, yeah. I had a few technical issues starting as well, but we sorted it out. I'm just going to bring you up to speed, Tim.
Sure.
I'm not going to go over everything, but basically, I just recapped what we've been talking about over the last few weeks
Yeah,
about
yeah.
um, how how to identify emotional wounds that need healing, and then I went on to beliefs. The session today is about belief, and it's what we believe can be a massive influence on the decisions that we make. The choices that we choose are often a memory that we believe is the best thing for us. So, can you see my screen? There's a an image there with how to overcome limiting beliefs.
Yes, I can. I read the article as well from the email that you sent.
Ah, right, okay, good. So, beliefs are self-belief, and I'm going to discuss some strategies for self-belief, but beliefs are also limiting beliefs and false beliefs. And it's these limiting beliefs and false beliefs that we often don't see, but they still influence our behaviors. So we may be aware, consciously aware of why we're performing of that we are performing a specific behavior, but we don't actually know the real motivation behind it. And a good example I use, which you probably can relate with, is people pleasing. We think we're being kind, generous, and helpful, but there's a limiting belief there that we need to feel liked, needed, and helpful. So we're doing things for other people that we don't really have the capacity to do because we want them to like us. So now I'm on to these strategies. There's five strategies that I've identified. I think there's five. I think I might have added another one on. Yeah, I added another one. There's six. Um, I'm just talking about these strategies to help us overcome limiting beliefs. And the first one is to identify that you have a limiting belief. And you can do that by identifying an emotional wound, as we spoke about before, like through a complex. Remember what a complex is? A resistance or procrastination when you've got a new challenge to face, but you're putting it off. It's because there's some uncertainty there, or you don't feel as though you're good enough, or you don't feel as though you're worthy of success. So this is how we can identify there's a limiting belief or a false belief. So then step two is then to challenge that belief. Why am I not good enough? Why am I unworthy? And we've got a history of proof to show that we are good enough, or that we are worthy, or that we are lovable. Or the other side to that is you have to reframe it and say, well, I may not be good enough to do this yet, but I can learn and I am becoming good enough. So obviously it depends on the challenge that's ahead of you. So, for example, now I'm trying to start this new business and I'm having to learn a lot of different skills, like how to create content, how to use editing suites, how to use design suites. But I'm also having to learn how to communicate to other people through this content and through social media platforms. These are all technologies that I'm not overly familiar with because I've never had to use them before I started this project. So I'm going into some days thinking I don't know what to do here. I'm not good enough, but I have to think, but I have to learn how to become good enough. So then I step out of that comfort bubble. I push past that resistance. I just sit down and do it. And the more I do it, and I feel the better I'm getting at it, then the more comfortable I'm becoming with it. So the more comfortable I become with it, the less stress I'm feeling, the less resistance I'm feeling, and um, I'm getting more confidence by seeing the improvements that I'm making, even though it's incremental. So the third step is if you have got a limiting belief and you've challenged it, then reframe reframe that limiting belief into words that give you the belief or the confidence or the compassion to break through that resistance. So, for example, um, in my case, I may not be good enough yet, but I'm willing to learn and I am getting better with experience. Or you may say something like, um, I'm not good enough, but I can become good enough if I give myself, because I am giving myself time to learn. You see what I mean? So maybe you've got your own examples of that, and we can talk about that later. So then the fourth step is to imagine the success. So you've got an idea, a goal, or a desire, and it's something you've never experienced before, but you can use your imagination to determine what outcome do you want, either the, well, normally it's at the next step. You can imagine how your life will look once the desire becomes completely manifest. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's always steps in between your idea to manifestation, the potential to reality. So using your power of imagination, you can look at a certain situation and look at your limiting belief and think, what qualities do I need? Which archetypal qualities do I need to overcome this wound, this feeling of insecurity or this feeling of inferiority? And how can I take that into this situation that I'm being challenged with? Now, if you can visualize that, it's even better because consciousness basically communicates in images. So imaginative thinking allows you to explore how your life will look, but also it gives you novel ideas, things that you don't have the experience of it, so you don't have the memory, you don't have the information. But imagination helps us to decide what course of action we can take. We may not have done it ourselves, but we may have seen it in a movie and you get inspired by that. Or you may just start having the conversation in your head that you plan to have with somebody, and something will just come naturally, spontaneously, as we are sometimes spontaneously in real life anyway, in real time. We can still have that spontaneity within imagination. So then the fifth step is to then put your idea into action. Even though you're resisting, just push past it. It's when we face our fears, when we confront our fears and step out of the comfort zone, that's when we learn. We learn more when we're challenged because it means that we don't have the information. When we are challenged, we don't have the information there at all. So, of course, we learn more when we're challenged. So, to overcome limiting beliefs and install self-belief, you have to take the actions and keep taking the action until it becomes more automatic. Until it becomes comfortable, then it becomes automatic. Then it becomes a habit. When it's a habit, it's wisdom. You just know what to do automatically because it becomes an autonomous energy. So if there's a fear that's holding you back and you're still struggling to act in spite of fear, then you may need to just go back to step three again and reframe it. Or if you make a mistake, go back to step two and reframe it. Imagine the success and then try again. Just keep acting. So the first two were really about identifying the belief and then challenging it so that you then start thinking a different way. So you start adopting different thoughts, adopting different attitudes, and adopting different behaviors. And then it's putting these new ideas into action and then tweaking them until you get it right. So again, we shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes. Then the third one I wrote, I added on to this as I was writing next week's script because next week I want to talk about hope and optimism. And hope, it turns out, is a positive belief that things will turn out well because you have the ability to succeed. You know you can succeed. So a feeling of hope actually drives you towards your goals. It gives you the motivation that keeps you going. So it's, I believe it's a quality that we can adopt to overcome limiting beliefs as well. So that's basically it for limiting beliefs. I was actually just going to open the floor to you guys now and ask about your takeaway points and whether you want to share any stories about any limiting beliefs that you've overcome. Tim, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can do. About 11 or 12 years ago, I'd been working for a company for approximately 20 years, just over. And it came to a stage where I was then going to get made redundant. And I'd always worked in the graphic design industry, primarily for a music company that did also music for aerobics instructors and DJs and that kind of thing. So I'd always worked for them in the print media side of things. As time went through that 20 years of working for them, the internet came on board and people joined us who were already trained to put websites together. So they were doing that. I was looking after the print side of things, running the design studio. And after the 20 years, when it came to being faced with redundancy, got a bit of an awakening that during that time I had not learnt to do website design, online marketing, that kind of thing. So I came to a bit of a sticking point of, okay, what do I do now? Because I can't do anything else. And after speaking to a few people, it was obvious that I didn't want to continue down the graphic design path. So I retrained to do a totally different job. And I was so far out of my comfort zone, I can't tell you. But just talking to people that were working in the industry I was looking at helped. Got as much information as possible, helped. And at first, when I went on the first course to retrain myself, I was like, I'm never going to be able to learn this. But the more you go for it, the more you reframe it of, well, you've learned other things before, so why can't you learn this? And just had to power through to take it on board, keep working at it, keep working at it, keep working at it, and be disciplined enough to be able to take it on board and understand it, and also be calm enough to not make a rod for my own back of needing to be perfect at it before I'd even started it. So giving myself a bit of a break, if you like, to give myself a bit of time to learn it, as I'm sure you're finding with the online tools that you're having to use.
Yeah, precisely.
So I started in that industry, and I've been in that industry about 10 or 11 years now. And I'm now at a stage where I'm the assistant manager for the testing company that I'm working for, which is probably a lot higher than I was expecting to get to as a position within a company, because I was half expecting to do contracting. So I'd be working for myself here, there, and everywhere, possibly all over the world.
Mm.
But I'm going to the joys of Sheffield every day instead. So
Mm.
that's um, where I've come from, worked through, and got to. So I've been able to see the success and reap the benefits. And
Mm.
the benefits are I'm probably earning more now than I ever have done before, and it's not as scary as I first thought.
Cool.
So
So yeah, so your persistence, and you said reframing that anxiety that you had and those beliefs that you had that you couldn't do it actually helped you to get from where you were to where you are now, and you're in a better position.
yeah,
Yep. But how were you feeling when you first went uh, into that new adventure?
a bit lost really because I was very much out of my comfort zone. It was totally new. I
Right.
didn't really know what I was doing. I was having to learn and pick things up on the way. But luckily, the people that I was working with and trying to train with were all really helpful. So that was a big plus
Mm.
point for me. That everything that has helped me along the path. Um, you pick up, you ask people questions,
Mm.
and people aren't scary. They will help you if you ask for help, um, but you've got to be brave enough to ask for the help in the first place.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
um,
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the words lost and learn, because you remember I've spoken about the divine child being potential, the
mm,
idea, the goal, the desire. In this instance, it's a goal, isn't it, to become well, to learn the tools, uh, uh, and be successful with this new adventure. Now, if you would have not spoken to the right people and had the willingness to learn, which is the explorer. So you see, you've gone from the divine child as potential, you stepped into the explorer to learn. You also stepped into the hero because you took action. But if you'd not done anything, if you'd not done any of those things and you just tried to muddle through it yourself because you didn't have the confidence to go and ask people for help, and you didn't want them to think that you were um, unintelligent, or that you were um, in, invested in, I don't know, whatever. You would have stayed at the divine child as a potential, and the divine child doesn't have a purpose, it doesn't understand what it wants to do. So if it's not developed, or the other archetypes aren't developed to help create that potential into reality, then you become lost. You'd go off your beat and try to go off your track. You know what I mean?
mm,
So you need the divine child needs the direction to get from the bottom of the pyramid to the top, the ruler, which is the experienced, the life experience, the manifested experience. And some of the other archetypes need to be developed for you to overcome that challenge. So thank you for your input there. That was a appropriate story, and I'm glad I was able to explain a bit more about how you can identify where you are with these archetypes, because you've probably got other stories as well where you didn't have a purpose, you didn't know where you're going, and you felt lost and you felt stuck. That's because you were still in that potential that you've not figured out how to realize.
mm,
Okay, Michelle, you've got loads of stories
God, which I'm not going to go into. But
about limiting
basically,
beliefs.
yeah, but basically, if you're doing anything new, whether you're entering a new relationship or going into a new business venture, you're always up against the mind of, am I good enough? Can I do this? So there's always the self-doubt along with the belief of, am I good enough? So it's, for me, it's in anything new that is a challenge.
Yep.
But now I just say, shut up, I can do this. Um, so I just tell myself to shut up.
Yeah, okay, that does work for some people. I was speaking to a woman earlier who's got ADHD, and she says sometimes she just has to tell herself to shut up when she has these
Because
intrusive
that
thoughts.
voice overpowers the heart. So that egoic mind overpowers the heart. So sometimes you just have to go, shut up, like, because that's what mum and dad used to do as a child. So what I've found is that same response is how we have to deal with things in adult to listen.
Yeah. It's interesting there that you say that it's the egoic voice, the mind, over the heart, because the divine child is the heart. So some of you will know that I also use Greek mythology to help illustrate and remember the archetypes. And with the divine child, you see Hestia. Hestia was the firstborn daughter of Kronos and Rhea, and she's known as the goddess of the hearth. The hearth represents the heart.
Heart, yep.
Yeah. So you see how it all ties together. This is why I love the archetypes and also bringing the Greek mythology in it, because it just lays everything out, that it just makes everything make more sense. I've been able to understand my own nature, and I understand other people's nature by understanding the archetypes. But then when I related to the Greek mythology as well, I then had the stories and the images that helped me to remember the archetype and also to identify it. So when I was learning about the archetypes, I figured out also that I could use Greek mythology as well, or any mythology, but I use Greek. So we have got a bit of time left. So it's a good job I did do a plan B. Unless either of you two want to share a few more stories about limiting beliefs.
No.
Well, the good news is that beliefs are not fixed, as you both well know. Your stories have just shown as an example of how you had a limiting belief and how it made you felt. And I've got plenty of my own as well. So we know that epigenetics shows us that cells can transmute. The brain's neuroplastic, which means that the more information that gets added to these neural networks means that we can actually adopt new behaviors and upgrade our belief systems. So one way to develop the divine child is by adopting self-belief. And that requires us to then take on the responsibility, like you did, Tim, to actually get to the next stage by whatever means. And in your case, it was learning and then taking action on what you'd learnt. And I spoke last week, didn't I? I give that example of how we go from the potential of the divine child and then choose one of the archetypes that have the qualities that are most appropriate for whatever you need to do next. So when we're feeling this resistance from the ego, we need to take the responsibility that we are going to actually take action. And one way we can soften that resistance is to be curious. Curiosity is one of the qualities of the divine child, but it's also a quality of the explorer. It's actually the superpower of the explorer. And there's a natural transition from the divine child into the explorer, whereby if we're more curious about something, then it's easier to be adventurous. It's easier to take the action to go and learn something. Some people get resistant to learning if they think it's going to be a steep learning curve. And it sounds like, Tim, it sounds like the learning curve you had was pretty steep. So being curious is a good quality to have to help you get out of that comfort zone. The other option would be to throw yourself into it, which is the hero. You just sometimes you need that push. And you may know what you want to do. You might have done your research. You think, okay, now I need to take this action, but you're still feeling that resistance. So the hero gives you the courage to step out of the comfort zone, engage with life, and just go ahead and at least try and do what you need to do. Now, this option also will help to, well, it can help to develop the hero as well. But then there's certain strategies we have to adopt to make sure that we don't wound our hero even more. Because the hero is also afraid of failure. And if you fail and your divine child is fragile, let's say, then you're more inclined to just give up straight away. I failed, I told you I was no good. So that belief becomes a fulfilling prophecy. So that's why we have to challenge the belief in the first instance and then keep challenging it. Because sometimes we'll have challenges that we have to face that aren't going to be a success on the first attempt. We sometimes have to fail to learn how not to do things. We have to fail to learn how to do something better. We learn through experience. So without having that experience in the first place, then how are you going to learn? The fourth strategy is to address denial. Denial is another quality, an undeveloped aspect of the divine child, and we have denial because it's a survival strategy. These little white lies that we tell ourselves keep us trapped in that comfort bubble because you're too afraid to step out of it, because when anxiety flares up, it becomes too uncomfortable. It disturbs your inner peace. So then we try to blot out the reality because it's too uncomfortable, or we won't admit any wrongdoing because that feels too uncomfortable. So we deny ourselves the opportunity, or we deny that we've made a mistake, or we decide that we've done something. We deny that we've done something wrong. But the issue with this is when you shirk your challenges and responsibilities, then your ego crumbles even more. It doesn't get the opportunity to develop. So then you just become, you sink further through the complex into the neurosis. A neurosis is things like anxiety, depression, OCD, and the scientific literature from the 50s has shown us that people with neuroses tend to then develop these chronic diseases. So it's all the de-evolution of consciousness rather than the evolution of consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
I think a lot of the things also run along a similar sort of path to a lot of the business tools that I've been using over the last 7 years at this company I'm working for. I've been more involved with the quality assurance side of things as well, and some of the things that we do on there with like the Deming cycle, which is plan, do, check, act. It's almost like a rotating circle of actions that you've got to take, and you're constantly checking what you're doing, you're constantly acting on it, you're constantly doing on it, and you're checking again, and other things which are similar to the challenging the belief system. So if one of my issues was I hate getting anything wrong, still do to a certain extent, but if I get anything wrong, I always beat myself with a big stick about it. But I've learned over the last couple of years that I've not got it wrong on purpose, and there's a reason why I'll have got it wrong in the first place. It may have just been I was having a busy day. It may have been I didn't know the information in the first place. So, okay, I then look at what the root cause is. I then can take corrective action if it's possible, but also take preventive action to stop it happening again. And if I can work it out those basics, which are similar to the reframing the program and the challenging the belief and that kind of thing. It's similar along a path that helps me to give myself a bit of a break, and that's
Right.
also helped me act as a manager for the guys that work for the business, because I wish I'd have learned it a lot of years ago when the
Yeah.
kids were young, when I could have said things like, "Yeah, they've made a mistake, but nobody's making a mistake on purpose.
Mm.
So look at it. Can it be fixed? Can it be learnt from? Instead of it being an issue, it's a learning opportunity."
Mm.
And that's sort of like reframed how I look at issues now.
Mm.
And I know that's helped. And it's
Yeah.
very similar to the how the architect that you're describing looks at ways of getting through things.
Yeah.
So I can see a lot of very similarities. It's just a slightly different way of looking at it.
Sure. Yeah. And it's a good example, again, because you're talking about the giving yourself compassion when you've made a mistake, and compassion um, quietens down the inner critic. So you know you've got a wound with the sage or the creator when the inner critic pops up, and we have to have compassion um, with these archetypes because they have perfectionist tendencies, because they're the archetypes that take on board that I'm not good enough. The creator, for example, gets harshly criticized, um, or harshly, or they get disciplined in for things that they feel are undeserved or the harsh.
And
So
as well, I think going the other side of it, so celebrating your successes,
yeah,
because
it's important
you
to.
know it's a good point where, again, I push things back to what happens at work and that kind of thing. And if we've had a good month or a really busy month, I always impress on the technical director of our business. Most of the lads on a Friday will have a greasy sarnie from the local cafe,
Yeah,
and I'll say, why don't we get that out of petty cash this week for the lads, just as a little thank you? And you you just see the look on the face change, because it's never happened to them with previous managers. But because I've tried to implement this as much as possible, and let people know if they've done a good job, because you're soon to get on people's back if you don't feel that they're getting a good job. And
yeah,
you look at when you look at that, instead of, okay, yeah, that's the guys at work.
mm,
When you turn it around and look at yourself, if you've done a good job, celebrate your own successes,
mm,
and that can help build your confidence and your ego, and
mm,
feel a bit more authentic in yourself as well.
yeah. So what you've done there, you're recognizing other people's um, efforts as well.
Yeah,
So that's connectivity. So you're stepping into the everyman there. So that also that gives them confidence and belief in you as a business and you as a manager. They now can believe that they can trust you, which means that they're going to be happier, they're going to work harder, and they'll be more productive. So you can, with that attitude that you're showing there, by rewarding people for their good work, for their successes, it keeps that success rate ticking over. Is that what you were telling me?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think it's also a case of um, building a culture, because
Yeah.
one of the main things that a lot of people will say is, "Oh, health and safety gone mad." Well, we have a different attitude towards it where we are, because health and safety is key. Everybody wants to go home with the same amount of fingers and toes to the families at the end of the day. They
Where
don't.
where do you work? Sounds like
I
a
work.
sawmill.
It's a non-destructive testing company basically in the steel industry.
Ah,
And
okay,
there's a
right,
lot of heavy things. There's a lot of moving things. There's a lot of things that
okay.
chemicals and that kind of thing that can be quite injurious. But a lot of the time, it's down to, we've got risk assessments and rules and regulations in place,
Mm,
and we instill everybody as a culture. Those are the rules that we stick to. Because if we don't, somebody gets hurt, and the last thing you want to do is anybody going home or having to go to the hospital or whatever it may be. And they do take it on board when you explain it to them properly, instead of it just a case of, oh, we've always done it like that, or oh, what's up with you, trying to be macho bravado about it. It's a case of, well, you explain it nice and calmly to them. One of the guys who's a keen motorcyclist, and he'll say, oh, I don't need to put, I always put my hand on the sling when I'm using the crane. Okay, so if that sling snaps and it takes 2 fingers off, how are you going to ride your motorbike? And when you put it into a way how he understands it, as soon as you talk about him not being able to ride his motorbike, he certainly starts listening to you.
Yeah.
So and it's
again, information, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's but it's getting everybody involved so that you involve them rather than just tell them demands. And once they're involved, they do tend to take it on board a lot more and work with it.
Yeah, it makes complete sense as well when you think about it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks, guys. I'm going to wrap this up now. But just before we go, next week, we're going to be talking about how hope and optimism are predictors of success, and also a bit of neuroscience in how they affect the brain. There may be some surprises. But I'm going to stop the share and recording if I can figure it out. There we go.